Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Hannya's Advocate. If this is the first video you found, this is a series where I discuss some unpopular or divisive opinions regarding the Yakuza series. Today's topic of discussion is a title that for the longest time we believe will be the ending of the Kiryu Kazuma saga. Before he appeared in Yakuza 7, and then Yakuza 8, also the Gaiden spin-off that was announced. Wait, we're getting sidetracked. Today, we'll be talking about Yakuza 6, The Song of Life. A title that's very much a love it or hate it type of game, where we're talking about its combat or its narrative. For the purposes of this video, we'll be focusing on the narrative aspect, and how Yakuza 6 was essentially the perfect send-off to the character of Kiryu Kazuma. Right off the bat, we need to address the premise of this being the end of Kiryu's story. Starting all the way back with Yakuza 4, whose Japanese subtitle roughly translated to Successors of the Legend, it seems that the developers wanted to let Kiryu rest for a while. We got 3 new promising characters, some which quickly became fan favorites, but it seems that the general reception wasn't strong enough to warrant a new canon entry where Kiryu would truly be absent. Then we got Yakuza 5 that upped the ante even further. 5 playable characters, 5 different cities, and a narrative more ambitious and convoluted than you ever could have hoped for. In hindsight, it feels like the developers were firing on every proverbial level, as if they wanted Yakuza 5 to be the last big hurrah for the series. Even when looking at the ending, where Kiryu is lying wounded in the snow, the scene where he finally meets Haruka felt as if either A, he would soon die of severe blood loss, or B, it was all a hallucination caused by the aforementioned wounds. The fact that it was all left so open-ended didn't help either. After the subsequent release and success of Yakuza 0, it felt that even if there were genuine doubts about the series' future, RGG Studios could continue to make new and exciting stories for the foreseeable future with critical and commercial acclaim by their side. So the fact that the interviews prior to Yakuza 6's release were very clear about this being the proverbial end to Kiryu's narrative made for a good starting point. The fact that we've seen nearly every facet to this character, from his brash, thuggish beginnings to the caring father figure with a legendary legacy behind him, meant that this final chapter merely had to stick the landing for Kiryu to be one of the most fondly remembered characters in all of video games, if he wasn't one already. For all we knew, this story could end in a manner of ways. We could see him properly retire after seeing his kids off from the orphanage. We could see him fall in love and get married, or even see the return of the beloved Kaoru Sayama. But at the same time, he could just as easily be killed to signal the end of this era of the franchise. All bets were off, and the fact that the previous Yakuza stories often ended with a number of lovable characters passing away meant that everyone would watch with excitement and bated breath, with their expectations through the proverbial roof. Once again, we're off to a great start. There's a number of lessons to be drawn from the stories in this franchise. Ones related to family, sticking to your beliefs, and having the option of starting anew at any point in life. All of these sentiments would fill players with optimism and a drive to push on. But one undeniable truth amidst this positivity is the fact that people involved with the criminal underground rarely see a happy ending. We've seen a number of people who called themselves Yakuza, some of which were genuine scum of the earth, but we've also seen people who deserved to live a long and happy life. A life that they were denied because of this world that they found themselves in. Whether you're a patriarch, a lieutenant advisor, or a mere foot soldier, once you get into the underworld, you won't get out unscathed. Examples of people who managed to survive decades in this way of life are few and far between. And when looking at the big picture, all of these people have lost those dear to them because of the Yakuza lifestyle. It's a tragic circumstance that everyone in the series has learned to accept as an inevitability. There's no denying that some of these characters just can't catch a break, losing friend after friend to the violent ways of the underworld. And seeing someone get broken down time and time again just makes you wish that there's a silver lining at the end. It's natural to look at a story you're emotionally invested in such a way. Everyone who has played the Yakuza games knows Kiryu is a kind soul, and one that genuinely deserved a happy ending at the end of his journey. After everything he'd given up to protect those around him, we wanted to believe that he would be rewarded in some way. That is why the bittersweet ending of Kiryu being forced to abandon his family hurt so much, and made people label this ending as bad or disappointing. It's understandable, considering that we've been by this character's side for the better part of 17 years. But once again, even when looking at the very first story that this series had told, we as players would eventually have to accept the same fact that the protagonists of this franchise accepted a long time ago. There are no happy endings here. Sure, the writers could have given Kiryu a happy send-off where everything he'd been through incalculably paid off, and I'm certain we all would have been happy with it, but that would go against the premise the series had started with. Maybe it's precisely because of fan outcry that Kiryu keeps getting dragged back into the series, even after the supposed final chapter of his story. Or maybe it's the fact that the developers themselves want him to see a happy ending, even if it may contradict the solemn themes of the titles that preceded it. You could even argue that it is precisely because of this bittersweet ending that people are still discussing Yakuza 6's story at length, even though it's been 6 years since the game's official release. Regardless of one's personal opinions on the ending's quality, one cannot deny the impact that it had on us, and nothing can illustrate that impact more than the decision Kiryu had made prior to his disappearance from the public. Kiryu is a living legend in Kamurocho, a person whose strength and nature ensured his righteous will would always come through, even in a world that would outright reject that will. One of the many acts that garnered him this legendary status and respect from his peers was the fact that no matter how violent things would get, Kiryu would never kill someone. This is a sentiment that was often the subject of jokes in the community, but the sentiment lies with the fact that Kiryu's fights are always tied to self-defense, or protecting a loved one. He would never outright attack, much less kill someone. And it is because of this fact that Kiryu's actions leading up to the final boss fight had so much weight to them. After seeing that there wasn't even a semblance of pride or dignity in the people he was fighting against, he was left with no options. The villains of Yakuza 6, Iwami and Sugai, were the most despicable creatures we've encountered thus far. Ones that couldn't be bargained or reasoned with. There was no good side to them. Time and time again, it was shown that they'd stop at nothing to obtain the money and power they sought. As long as they lived, Kiryu and his loved ones would never be safe. This is why the quick exchange with Akiyama mattered so much. Kiryu was ready to sacrifice his legacy to ensure that his family was safe. To him, the title of a benevolent dragon meant nothing if it meant he would lose another loved one. So the only person he wanted to involve in this act was his newly found kyodai, Naguma, someone who shared his exact beliefs and sentiments. They refused to burden their loved ones with the choice they'd made, so they moved on without them to put an end to the story. And despite their best efforts, the people they wanted to protect were always going to be a part of this mess. The bonds they all shared meant that this will to protect what you value went both ways. If it hadn't been for those bonds, this story could have ended as a true tragedy, but they managed to overcome it, together. Though, naturally, there would still be consequences to these actions. The Secrets of Onomichi, as bizarre as it may seem out of context, had grander ramifications than we'd ever seen. Worse than Jingu's 10 billion yen, the Black Monday incident, or the corruption of the Tokyo Police Department as a whole. No matter how optimistic we may be as observers, something this big can't be shrugged off. In the end, this left us with only one option if we wanted to move on. By this point, Kiryu was stuck in a never-ending cycle of getting dragged back into the world of the Yakuza time and time again, even when it went against his better wishes. This chapter of his life had to end. The Secrets of Onomichi by itself presented us, the players, with the same conundrum as the writers of the Yakuza series. We wanted more of Kiryu because this character meant so much to us, that by the end of it all, nobody could really get what they wanted. Kiryu would never get a happy ending if he kept getting involved with the underworld, and the writers couldn't just keep playing it safe by retelling the exact same core story. They opted for the rough road, where the narrative stakes would be so high, it would make sure that things could never go back to the way they were. The story of Yakuza 6 could have easily ended in the death of Kiryu's legacy, where this one act of violence caused by desperation would be the true signal for the end of an era. An end that was brought about by never-ending ambition and refusing to say goodbye to what these fictional characters, and we as people who were along for the ride, have known for so long. And yet, despite all of these negative connotations and utter desperation in the final moments of the game, the aftermath of this story is one filled with hope. The reason behind Kiryu's supposed death makes for the only viable solution where every side could be pleased. The writers could adhere to the narrative of there being no happy ever after, while still leaving the door open for future involvements that wouldn't repeat the same premise. The mantle of a series protagonist could be taken up by a new guy who mirrored our sometimes detrimental positivity. In a lot of ways, Kiryu's role in the series is now the same as that of Dante in Devil May Cry 4 or Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid 2. Now we can witness the legend from a rookie's perspective. For better or worse, the version of Kiryu that we saw in Yakuza 7 seems to genuinely be at peace with himself. He mentored a brash new Yakuza that mirrored his own youthful ambition, while bearing an Irazumi reminiscent of his old Kyodai. Admittedly, we have no clue what the newly announced Gaiden and Like a Dragon 8 will bring to the table. But Yakuza 6 was a game that needed to happen if this series could continue to thrive. Even if Kiryu is brought back to the story every few entries, the sacrifice he made in Onomichi made sure that everyone who was so dependent on him would finally be forced to grow by themselves. From Daigo finally being a worthy leader to his underlings, to Haruka and Yuta raising their newborn, to the children of the orphanage moving on, this does feel like a sad ending of a touching story. But in reality, we're all just getting started. Everyone's given a clean slate. Now it's up to us to fill it in. Thank you for watching. This was a really difficult script to write, considering how we're currently in between some crucial releases, but this was a topic that I felt had to be shared, at the very least to show my love for this particular game. I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any other topics you would like to see discussed here, feel free to state them in the comments. I for one would like to talk about the combat of the early Dragon Engine titles as well, since there still seems to be a lot of criticism thrown their way, but that's a story for another day. Until next time, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Cheers!